Oh, and I'm adding to this report, the time changes tonight. Do it now. Set your clocks an hour ahead. And if you're not, make sure that your cell phone provider is the one who's going to change your cell phone for you. Some of them do. Some of them you have to set your own cell phone. Make sure you set your clock ahead an hour right now so that you'll be on time to whatever you're doing tomorrow. Alrighty then? Take care. And be safe.
Welcome back to the NUTRIMEDICAL Report, and we have John Moore. His website is thelibertyman.com. He has his own radio show 7 to 9 a.m. Monday to Friday across the nation in Central Standard Time. And Morrison, often his co-host, her website is homeland-defense, 4, the letter U.com. Our scientists dealing with things like the search for comets, asteroids, Earth changes from such things as earthquakes, volcanoes, and sinkholes. And of course, we had a recent sinkhole in an area of Florida where sinkholes are known to occur that swallowed up Jeff Bush. I don't think there's any relationship to the Bush family, but literally swallowed him up, and they can't find the body. A very scary thing when these sinkholes are now increasing in frequency all over the world. John, what's the latest reports and things you're following, either militarily or behind the scenes or your contacts? Hello, John. Are you there? I can't hear John. Ann, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Ann Morrison's report regarding the brilliant lighting sky as it flies by the Pan-STARRS comet. This is one of the 3 big comets called
Hello, Dr. Eagle.
Yeah, hi, Alexander. Just hold a minute for Ann's report. C/2011 L4 Pan-STARRS. And give us a report on how big this will be. And the telescopes from the 8th of March right through the 10th, I guess, is the best flyby. It's going to be pretty dramatic, but it's not going to probably affect our weather or the sun as much as the big one up in November, which the kernel or the central of the comet of that one in November is likely to be 2,600 kilometers and very likely to produce a superstorm in the sun. This one is going to be quite a light show. Comets always have been feared in the past, right through the ancient times, because they always meant hellacious and horrible things happen on the planet Earth. This one I don't think is flying close enough to actually affect our weather or do other things, although we have some strange things happen like a hailstorm down in the Baja California, which at this time of the year is pretty unusual. And what's happening in this area, the area of the earth changes, the sinkholes, what else is going on in terms of earthquakes and volcanoes?
Yeah, well, this Pan-STARRS L4 was discovered by the constellation of satellites that NASA sent up called Pan-STARRS, and they call it 2011 L4, so I'm assuming it's the 4th comet that they found in 2011. And you're right, close approach is on the 10th, which is 2 days from now. It'll be Sunday. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday, will provide the best viewing opportunity. It will move further from the sun, but it should be easier to spot in the night sky.
Right.
And it's going to the apparent path from March.
It sounds like somebody's building something behind you there.
From March 8th, from March 12th until March 26th. So we're talking about 2 weeks.
Yeah. Really? Okay. Yeah, that's distracting. Is there someone else in the room there, or children, or what's happening?
It's not on my side. I think it
must be on Alexander's side. I guess we have to get the pets and the kids out of the room, otherwise it's very hard to hear. And what you're saying basically is we're going to have quite a light show. There's 3 major comets. According to Professor McCanny, these are being pushed in by a large dwarf star in the Oort cloud area. The NASA and these scientists have been watching it since Pioneer 10, and going back to science right to Tycho Brahe back over a century ago, the astronomer from Europe. What we're seeing is this year the globalists are in a freak-out position because they want to shut off the power, and they have to actually, with it 8.5 minutes after the light and the initial pulse that tells them the CME is coming, and the stereoscopic telescopes and the other space-based observation scopes that they have aimed at the sun tell them that there's a superstorm on the sun. They have 2.5 to 4 days to shut off the power grid and bring about basically martial law. If they don't do that, and even when they do that, there still could be enough telluride currents to burn out a lot of the satellites, the ground-based transmission lines, step-down transformers, and much of your electronics, even if it's not plugged in. So we tell people, go to SEMF, get Faraday cages and bags and so on over your equipment and supplies and your ham radio. If you don't do it, even if it's not plugged in, it could get fried. And we don't know how much energy we released. If it's the amount of energy of the Carrington event, 1859, there were people that got second and third degree burns. There were people that got electrocuted from the induced currents, and there were railway ties that went on fire. So there's a lot of current there. This, if it's equivalent to Carrington, which is likely to be even stronger with this event, we could be dealing with a major cataclysm and a dropout of a good chunk of the power grid, satellite communications, and virtually all electronics that drive cars, equipment, machines of the Western world. We don't know how much is going to get knocked out, but if there's a big superstorm, they will preemptively shut off the grid, and they may keep it off for some time because it could be more than one storm happening on the sun for once it gets riled up. So, and anything further on the pan-stars? Is it likely to pass by Earth close enough to affect weather, or is
go
by the sun?
The Earth is going to be on the sun side of pan-stars, but remember that the sun rotates in 27 days, and so whatever disturbance it might cause on the sun, for instance a flare, it will rotate around in half of that time. So supposedly in 13 days, so in 2 weeks, then that disturbance could affect Earth.
Yeah.
So
because that disturbance could happen for, in other words, could you raise the activity of these hot zones in the sun for some weeks or even months. So what do you see happening this year? Besides pan-stars, there's going to be a light show. What's the next one, and what's the rough date that this next comet's coming by?
Yeah, the next one is called Lemon, and it's supposed to fly by like the middle of April. I mean, we're supposed to be able to see it here in the Northern Hemisphere on April 18th. And it's coming in now. It's coming in much closer to the orbit of the Earth. Again, the Earth is going to be on the sun side of the comet, so we don't expect a direct effect immediately, but maybe 2 weeks or after 2 weeks. It's coming in just outside the orbit of Venus, which means that it's within 0.3 astronomical units of the Earth, except that the Earth's orbit, because the Earth won't be close to Venus at that time. Now, this was found by an observatory in New Mexico, and it's called the Lemon Observatory, and it's going to glow green, and that's because it will. Because it has inside of it cyanide, which glows green.
And by the way, that cyanide, people need to understand the cyanide and the cyanide-like compounds are natural neuromuscular blockers. They're in the Halley's Comet, and when comets pass over, if we pass through the tail, it can kill humans and animals. Just passing through the tail is a neurotoxin. It's basically the same as being hit with nerve gas.
Now, this particular one, the Lemon, Comet Lemon, has an elliptical orbit, and it has a period, that is, it comes back by our solar system every 11,000 years.
Yeah, so this is one that is a little bit more concerning than the pan-stars. This one, we could pass through the tail of it, too, is that right?
Yes, that is correct, because it's going to pass through...
Yeah, it could take a while, too. How many days or weeks will it take to pass through the whole tail?
Well, we're on the sun side, so we won't see the tail of it until for 6 months, maybe 5 months, and then shouldn't take more than 2 weeks or a month to pass through the tail. But it'll just be the debris that's left by the tail. It won't be the tail itself, because by that time, Lemon will be out of the solar system.
Right, so but these chemical trails can last for millions of miles. In other words, behind it, these chemical debris tails are a cohesive tail of toxic chemicals that are neurotoxins that literally follow the comet throughout the solar system and beyond.
Okay, and remember that the tail will point away from the sun.
Right.
So we're not expecting it to point along the orbit of Earth, but wherever it is.
So in other words, we're probably going to be lucky that it's not going to hit us this time.
Yes, that is right. Because this one has been known to provide. It's one of those evil comets that we hear about from our, through our folk tales.
Right.
Because it has created problems before on Earth.
Right. And it could be, quote, an extinction level type comet, too.
It could be if it were closer, but I don't think it's going to be that close to Earth.
Not this time. Is it close enough to the sun to cause a solar storm?
Well, I would say so. It's going to be right outside the orbit of Venus.
So we expect some... Welcome back, and I'd like you to, carry on into the issues of the Dark Knight satellite. You did some interesting research on this, and fill us in what you found, and then we'll expand on that.
Well, this comet, this Lemon Comet, has an elliptical orbit, which brings it into the solar system every 11,000 years. And 11,000 years is one of those numbers that tells us that things happen. And so
Ice ages and extinction level events is what you're talking about.
So I looked at the Black Knight satellite to see if because I thought that it was about 11,000 years old, and as it turns out, it was discovered in the February 1960, and it was in polar orbit. And it was several sizes larger than anything either Russia or the United States would have been able to get off the ground.
Right.
And then the oddness began. Now, so this was 1960, and I forget what year Sputnik went up, but we started sending up satellites.
50s, late 50s.
Then the oddness began. Ham operators began to receive strange coded messages. And one of the hams in particular said he had managed to decode one of the transmissions, and it corresponded to a star chart. The star chart, which would have been plotted from Earth 13,000 years ago. So that's how they knew that it was at least 13,000 years old. Well, the stars don't change that much. Yes, they change over 13,000 years, but plus or minus 2,000 years is nothing on a geologic scale like this. So it could have been put there 11,000 years ago when this Lemon Comet was in the solar system. And then on September 3rd, 1960, 7 months after the satellite was first detected by radar, a tracking camera at Grumman Aircraft Corporation's Long Island factory took a photograph of it, and people on the ground had occasionally seen it for about 2 weeks at that point, and viewers would say it was a red glowing object moving in an east-west orbit, and its speed was about 3 times normal, and they examined it and analyzed it, but nothing was ever made public. And then 3 years later, Gordon Cooper was launched into space for a 22-orbit mission. And on his final orbit, he reported seeing a glowing green shape ahead of his capsule. And they also said that the tracking station in Australia was able to pick it up on radar. And this was reported by NBC, but the official explanation was that he had hallucinated.
Well, rather than giving a lot of answers, I want to raise a few questions. When I got my security clearance and interview in Falcon Air Force Base underground in the underground city in July 10th, 1994, and I went back there twice actually to review the facility and walk through the underground matrix of the supercomputer array of Cray 4 and Cray 5 gallium arsenide nano quantum computers in a giant underground cube array. The head of Space Command basically said, this is a come to Jesus talk, and he sat us down and said, well, the first thing I want to tell you about is the Dark Knight satellite. And I said, well, why? He said, well, it's in polar orbit. I said, well, that's interesting. I said, how long ago have we been able to put things up in polar orbit, figuring it's like 20, 30 years? He said, 4 years previously. And I said, you're kidding. I said, well, how long do you think this has been up there? He said, we estimate between 13,000 and 35,000 years ago. And it's bigger than our space station by quite a large margin. It's inside the Van Allen radiation belt, and we have been to it, but not inside. And apparently, it's basically a man-made or intelligence-made craft it is still sending off radio beacon information. And it's a very ancient thing. Now, I happen to know from my chemistry professors that did research in northwestern India, they proved that there was a nuclear war between the area of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and northwest India around 13,000 years ago. So there's a nuclear war then, and they identified the nuclei in the soil. It wasn't due to a comet or an asteroid or something like, let's say, a supernova that occurred, or called gammas. Sometimes you get what's called gamma beams that can beam through the galaxy. So what we know is that the universe is a lot stranger than people think. I tend to call these, instead of ETs, I call them transdimensionals, which also explains everything in the Bible and every other ancient book of history. We have our globalists, in fact, are, in a sense, avatared on a mental and a spiritual level by these transdimensionals. Our globalist elite, run by the Vatican, the Jesuits, the Council of the Druidic Council, etc., and all the globalist Masonic organization by 1,000 different names, all are basically under the control of these what I call transdimensionals and demonic entities. And rather than using ancient technology and words, what we need to understand is that there is real technology here, there's real evil here, and there are things going on that are far more, how can I say it, galactic and cosmic than our little local area, the tiny sapphire blue jewel, the Earth, the blue water planet, the Earth, around a little yellow dwarf star called Sol, on a moderate arm of a middle-sized galaxy in the we call the Goldilocks zone of our Milky Way constellation and galaxy. So, in other words, things are far more, how can I say it, there's a lot more to heaven and earth than is been absorbed or even imagined in the mortal mind of the mundane man. And if you're willing to open up your mind and ask questions, even if you don't have the answers, you realize just how little you know. In fact, you know less than nothing, rather than thinking you know something about everything out there. And I only talk about a tiny portion of this because I know considerably more than this, but a lot of it I can't talk about, because if I do, I will blow you away so far out of orbit you will not even be able to know which end is up. So I just kind of reserve it to the time when it's appropriate to tell. But I can tell you right now that our world is in a cataclysm, not just because of bad leadership, but because of transdimensional and demonic interference with our political system, our medical system, our geopolitics, and even our mental life, our spiritual life, and our every system, including education, religion, etc. And anybody who thinks otherwise, if you just examine the documents and history through every nation, every religious group on earth, you'll see the scientific evidence of exactly what I said is as plain as the nose on your face.
Well, I find it very interesting that Kubrick came out with the movie 2001. Yeah. When did it come out, 70 or 80?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, the entertainment industry is very closely tied to the Democratic Party, and I just wonder if he had some inside knowledge there, because obviously they're not telling the public anything about this, and I wonder if this, if it's possible.
Well, the word Hollywood actually means the Hollywood, or it's a phallic symbol from the holly plant being a magic wand. So Hollywood basically means a magic wand, and it's used to direct the group psychology to actually change the timeline of the history of mankind on this planet. And so Hollywood basically is an arm in the sense of the no such agency in the ancient Druidic priesthood, all the Masonic orders, and all of the ancient cults that are tied and controlled by these transdimensionals. The architecture and technology that's passed on and passed through channeling, etc., of these beings, including the Society of the Black Sun in Nazi Germany, Blavatsky, all the wizards of Saudi Arabia that literally summon the jinn and channel information and knowledge from places beyond the senses of the human mind. And people who don't understand this are become victims of it because they don't believe that this reality exists when it most definitely does.
Right, so what I'm thinking, this is just my imagination running wild, is that this isn't a comet coming in at all, but a spaceship.
Well, we don't know. All we can tell you is that this year the globalists are freaked out because they feel they're going to lose control. What's your take on it, Alexander? Because what I see is them scrambling around like chickens with their heads cut off, concerned that they're not going to preserve their underground layers and their high-speed maglev tunnels and their off-world space platforms and all the other things they've done to accumulate everything from grand pianos to fine caviar and the best vehicles underground, the best entertainment so they can stay down there where the earth goes to hell in a handcart. They're not helping the public out at all. And they literally are putting out predictive programming like World War Z and other foolishness, including these government drills and homeland security. And they're trying to promulgate conflict. Rather than us figuring out ways to defend the planet, they're trying to energize conflict with the Middle East, energize conflict with China, energize trade wars, and energize economic chaos to make sure that we are so busy with chaos we can't interfere with their survival to the next age after we destroy ourselves. Because we're not prepared to deal with Earth-based extinction-level events because they're not preparing the public. We hear your comment when we come back.
Sure.
Live, this is One for the Record. I'm Diana, and today is March 9th, 2013. And here are your news updates for today. I had washed Max's blankie, and he decided he was going to dry it with a towel, and then put the towel on top of it because it was a little bit damp. Max, are you okay now, Max? Everything okay? Comes Tippy. Alrighty then. It was funny a second ago. Of course, when you get him on camera, he has to stop. He was taking the towel. Are you gonna fix it with it? Here he goes. See, he's drying the blankie off a little bit. He didn't like that it was. And Tippy's doing the same thing. She's making her bed. Are you making your bed, Tippy? She's making her bed. See? You making your bed, Tippy? Make your bed. See, they're rearranging the clean blankie. I had to show you that. They're so cute. Tippy, what are you doing? Good girl. See, it's a little bit damp still. I guess the dryer didn't dry it totally 100%. So they're rearranging it there. Alright, enough of that. Okay, let's go to the breaking news. I got some weather alerts for you. Okay, let's go to 2 hours ago. Okay, we'll start with 2 hours ago. Heads up, update. Reports say 602 flight now canceled at Denver Airport due to winter storm at Denver Post. And that was from Denver Post. Dallas-Fort Worth International experiencing delays due to thunderstorms. That's coming out of the breaking weather. Also 2 hours ago, Colorado's Interstate 70 shut down due to snow. Heads up. Also, update. Report of 5.4 inches of snow 2 miles west of the Denver International Airport. Also, we're just doing the weather. Let's see here. Ohio Interstate shut down after dump truck with raised bed crashes into pedestrian bridge. That's coming out of AP. That was an hour ago. An hour ago. Heads up. Tornado warning in effect for Kimball County, Texas. That's coming out of the W Underground. Also, an hour ago, National Weather Service, up to 14 inches of snow reported in areas of Colorado. It's coming off of NBC News. Also, an hour ago, 1-inch hail and wind damage reported in Hamilton, Texas. It's coming out of breaking weather. Also, officials in Hamilton, Texas report multiple trees down in the city, collapsed roof of a supermarket from winter storm. Okay. And anything else? No, not right now. Other than, which isn't weather, an hour ago, Mozilla Vice President, company won't make an iOS-friendly version of Foxfire web browser until Apple changes its ways. Ooh, that's coming out of CNET. Alrighty then. Now you got the internet news. Alrighty then. Moving on. The Extinction Protocol 2012 and beyond. NASA finds particle accelerator in solar winds. Oh, there you go. And what they're saying is it is made of hydrogen and helium ions with a sprinkling of heavier elements. And they're saying it's another way that they can possibly grab energy. Unlimited amounts of energy. There you go. And this is, of course, this is right before Stephen Greer. He's getting ready to open his movie about the UFO disclosure, and it's going to open in Hollywood. So heads up on that. He's going to give out information on free energy. So that's why this is probably happening now. Because he's going to disclose it all anyway. Heads up. Also, the calm before the solar storm. NASA warns something unexpected is happening on the sun. See, the sun's been very quiet. It's supposed to be the peak now of the peak of all the solar of all the solar flares and things, and it's being very quiet for some reason. Also, death toll rises to 14 in landslide in the Philippines. Also, ice island forms off Lake Michigan. Global heads up on that. Ice island forms off Lake Michigan. Also, global temperatures hit 4,000-year high. Rate of increase fastest in 11,000 years. So heads up on that. Moving on. The Watchers watching the world. Alright, researchers discovered source of solar wind energy. Researchers have found signs of an energy source in the solar winds, a hot and fast flow of magnetized gas that streams away from the sun's upper atmosphere. Solar wind is made of hydrogen and helium ions with a sprinkling of heavier elements. So they're talking about the solar winds. Alrighty then, but there's helium-3, and that's mainly on the moon. I think we have some here, and that would light a whole city. For like what? Like just a little bit of it would light a whole city for something like 1,000 years or something. Alright, so they already know how to do this. Okay, graphene, biodegradable substance with potential of revolutionizing technology. There's another one for energy. How about that one? That's because I'm telling you, it's because Stephen Greer is gonna he's gonna disclose the whole thing. So now they're racing to give some other answers before he does, but it's too late. He already filmed it. Everyone knows about what he's getting ready to do. But he's gonna tell you how long everyone's known about it. So it doesn't matter if he just discovered it. He's going to tell you how long ago it was discovered. Alright. Asteroid 2013 ET to make Earth close approach on March 9th. Heads up. It's between the 9th and the 10th. So, heads up for those who can see it. Alrighty then. Moving on. Fukushima, Japan. E&E News. Heads up. WSJ. Molten fuel could be outside Fukushima reactor. Experts concerned it's not being cooled properly. Go figure. Go figure's not a part of this article. Alright. Also, Fukushima workers. Smoke was pouring out of Unit 1 before a tsunami hit. No doubt quake-crippled reactors could torpedo Japan's attempts to restart nuclear plants. Also today, Gunderson, I repeat, significant new material will be presented at Fukushima Symposium. Live stream starts Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, Fukushima workers, plant set to collapse. from another quake or tsunami. Critically vulnerable, completely fragile. And yesterday, video. Quake shifted Fukushima underground water and pushed it to the surface all at once. Still gushing out 18 months later. Oh, that was today. Okay, yesterday. Japan Times. Walls are cracked below ground at Fukushima reactor buildings, as if the damage above ground isn't enough to worry about. Heads up. Crimes against humanity. Two years later, they're going to start talking about it, right? What happened 2 years ago, like we're not going to get upset about it, and like we didn't know. Alright. U.S. Canada. TV. Giant sinkhole to more than double in size. It's probably going to take out Highway 70. You could look at loss of life. Resident. I think everyone should get out of there then. Get out of there and take them to court somewhere else. Also, Sheriff. Officials need to plan for sinkhole number 2. We've got to have plans in place where we can move fast. Also, TV. Concerns about second giant sinkhole opening up on verge of collapsing. Could take out Highway 70. Size may double. It's probably all connected, so you know, everybody, if you're out there by there, no wonder the governor's not going down there. He's afraid when he gets down there, he's going to get sucked into the sinkhole or be exposed probably to noxious gases. Do you understand that? You see what I'm saying? If there really wasn't anything to worry about, he probably would have been Johnny on the spot. He would have been right there. Alrighty then. Take the hint. Alrighty then. Fair winds. Breaking news. Secret bombshell report released. Confirms Edison knew of major problems at Santa Onofre nuclear plant. And that was yesterday. Alrighty then. Alright. Here we go. It is one day down of the weekend. You still have one more day. Stay tuned. I'm attaching more things to this report. Alright, take care. Be safe and always be prepared for anything. Wow. Dark Knight Space Station. You're going to hear about it before you see this report. Built at least maybe 13,000 years ago. Oh, who built that? Oh, and it's still sending signals. Heads up! What a disclosure. Stay tuned. And yesterday was a disclosure about how the Earth really was formed. It was all land, and then as it broke apart, the oceans came. Just like Mars. Mars is all land. There's no ocean because it's a lot younger, and it's gonna, when it starts growing and the land starts expanding and breaking apart, then the water will reemerge, will emerge. Alright, take care. Check out the report yesterday. It was pretty cool also. And I'll see you. It's like Saturday night at the movies. I'll see you again tomorrow. On the flip side, be safe out there with the snow. And no barbecues in the house. Alright, take care.
It's Wednesday, March 6th, 2013, and this is the Energy Education Podcast. I'm Kevin Hurley. This week's show is all about money. Nuclear plants are expensive to operate, but they're even more expensive not to operate. Coming up, we'll look at how some utility-owned U.S. nuclear power plants continue to drain the public's pocketbook, sometimes to the tune of $50 million a month without generating a single watt of electricity. Plants owned by utilities are paid for by ratepayers. Today, we're joined by Arnie and Maggie Gunderson to discuss nuclear finances. How are utility-run plants, supported by ratepayers, run differently than the private merchant plants that sell power to the grid and need to meet the bottom line? When the money doesn't make sense anymore, some plants have called it quits, while others are continuing to bill the public. Arnie and Maggie Gunderson, welcome to the show.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
So we've talked a lot, Arnie and Maggie, in the past about merchant plants versus utility-operated plants and how both of them might be losing money. A utility-operated plant is one that's paid for by the ratepayers, like San Onofre. So even if it's down, the ratepayers will continue to pay the bill, whereas a merchant plant like Kewaunee is responsible for its own business. Arnie?
Yeah, what happened when all these nuclear plants were built, they were all built by utilities, and that meant that a group of ratepayers all agreed to pay the bills no matter what. But in the 90s, a whole bunch of these nuclear plants got sold to for-profit corporations like Exelon in the Midwest and Entergy in the South and up here in Vermont and Xcel. There's a whole series of companies that went on a buying spree and bought almost half of the nuclear power plants. Each one of those got spun off as a limited liability corporation. So their only asset is the nuclear plant. So when the nuclear plant shuts down, they have no source of income because they're supposed to be selling that power to the grid, and as opposed to having ratepayers on the hook to pay for it. So these merchant plants are beholden only to their stockholders, and when they break, then the stockholders will immediately make a decision, is it worth fixing them, or should we shut them down for good?
So the question is, who has to pay the bill? In the utility-run plants, the ratepayers are paying the bill, and in the merchant plants, the stockholders are paying the bill. Well, let's start with Crystal River. Crystal River is a utility-run plant. The ratepayers are paying the bill, but they've recently come into a bit of financial trouble. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, in 2009, they did a major repair to the containment. They really didn't have to replace steam generators, but they chose to, and that required them cutting a huge hole in the side of the containment. And in the process, they cracked the containment. It was a 60-foot long by 20-foot high crack. They didn't seek expert advice when they did it. Each of the members of the management team had seen it done before, so they figured they were smart enough to do it without getting experts in. Sort of like, they slept at a Holiday Inn Express, so therefore they could do brain surgery. But they screwed it up, and the plant was shut down since 2009. Now, a nuclear plant, you're paying salaries, you're paying guard force, you're paying for all sorts of costs, probably to the tune of $500 million a year just to keep the plant shut down. So in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, and just until 2 months ago in 2013, Floridians were paying something on the order of $500 million a year to keep this nuclear plant shut down. Frequent readers of our website and people who listen to these blogs have heard me say for the better part of a year that the Crystal River unit had flatlined and they should have pulled the plug and done the merciful thing. And finally, just last month in February, the owner of Crystal River, Progress Energy, did just that. They said, this thing makes no sense. We're into it for $2 billion already. And it's going to cost $2 billion more to fix. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, they weren't really into it for any money. The Floridians are on the hook for all of this. But because of a courageous journalist, Ivan Penn, and because of a courageous newspaper, the Tampa Bay Times, they had put this plant in the spotlight, and they were making Floridians aware that they were losing something like $50 million a month on the costs. So Progress decided, well, we really can't hose the people of Florida anymore, and it's time to close this plant down for good. So Crystal River 3 shut down for good in February, just last month.
From the time Crystal River shut down until the time that they decided to pull the plug, how much did Floridians pay just to keep it shut down?
The monthly costs are about $50 million a month. Of course, some of that can get disguised and we'll probably never, ever determine exactly what it costs. But a good number for a staff of 500 or 600 employees essentially doing nothing because there's no electricity coming out, something on the order of $50 million a month.
And it was shut down for how many months?
It was into 4 years. It was well over $1 billion. Now, see, Progress doesn't include that in any of their estimates because it came out of the rate base. You know, people were paying this every month, and it had been agreed to when the plant was running. So Progress will never admit that the cost to keep the plant running was well in excess of $1 billion, onward to $2 billion in the time it was shut down. And that's money Floridians spent, and they're never going to see again. If you remember the movie All the President's Men, which was about the Watergate scandal, remember what Deep Throat kept telling the Dustin Hoffman?
Follow the money.
Follow the money. That's what this entire broadcast today is about. Follow the money.
So, saying about $2 billion, well, how much does it cost to build a new nuclear plant?
Well, a new nuclear plant in Georgia is about $20 billion. There's 2 nuclear plants going up in Georgia at the Vogtle site, or about $20 billion. So $2 billion is about 1/10 of the cost to build a new one.
Just to keep it shut down.
But you have to remember the Crystal River plant was 40 years old, and they put in $2 billion into a plant that was already on death's doorstep because it was so old.
It was at end of life. I mean, nuclear plants are only designed for 40 years, correct? Even though they're getting these extended licenses?
Yeah, the NRC is considering allowing these plants to run to 60 years, but in fact, the oldest nuclear plant in the world has only run 47, and it was shut down too. So we've got no history of a nuclear plant running beyond about 47 years.
But isn't it true that when these plants were designed, you know, they based the design on how long they thought the steel would last, the concrete would last? Aren't a lot of these older containments and these plants, like Crystal River, suffering concrete degradation for their containments, for example, and, you know, all kinds of things just having failure because of their age?
Yeah, there's a lot of age-related problems on these old plants anyway. Yet the Nuclear Regulatory Commission continues to allow them to run for an extra 20 years. They were designed to last 40 years. There's no doubt. I mean, I was involved in the design of these plants back in the day, and I know we were using 40 years in the design calculations. So, yeah, we're stretching these units in some cases to the breaking point.
Why?
Money.
Money. How so?
Well, the asset is completely depreciated, and at this point, it just churns out money because there's the cost of the plant has already been covered in the rate base.
It sounds like an old clunker that I'm still paying insurance on, yet would never pass a registration.
Yeah, that's a pretty good example, Kevin.
All right, so now let's talk about 2 other plants, the Kewaunee plant and the Fort Calhoun plant. The Kewaunee plant is a merchant-run plant, whereas the Fort Calhoun plant is a utility-run plant. Both are relatively close to each other. Both put out relatively the same power. They're very similar, except for this difference in how they're owned. Arnie, can you compare the 2?
Kewaunee is a merchant plant, and it is operating. It hadn't broken. And in fact, it had gotten a 20-year license extension. So it was allowed to operate for 60 years. But the owner of the plant said, we're not making any money. We've got all these people and all these costs, and electricity is just not making it. So therefore, they shut down a plant that was running. That's what a merchant plant does. They run it like a business. If it's not making any money, even if it's operating, shut it down. So that's what happened at Kewaunee. Exactly the opposite is happening at Fort Calhoun. At Fort Calhoun, it's been broken for 2 years, but it's owned by ratepayers, and the ratepayers have continued to pump out tens of millions of dollars a month to pay the salaries of these 500 guys who are trying to repair a very old, very small power plant.
Kevin, you said Kewaunee and Fort Calhoun are near each other, and I thought that our listeners might want to know where they're located. Kewaunee is in Wisconsin, and in Carlton, Wisconsin. And, you know, look at all the austerity measures Wisconsin has been under, and they're just having a terrible economic situation. Fort Calhoun is in Nebraska, and Fort Calhoun was subjected to horrendous flooding last year. So, Arnie, what's the status now on both of these plants?
Yeah, Fort Calhoun was shut down in April of 2011, and then the Missouri River flooded, and then they said, wow, there's a lot of problems in the plant. The foundations were in trouble. They did some structural analysis on the containment, and they had lost the records, and the records they could find were wrong. So they discovered more and more and more problems on the Fort Calhoun reactor. But the management of the utility didn't have a profit motive here. They were going to keep that plant running come hell or high water, so they continued to charge the ratepayers tens of millions of dollars a month while this plant is shut down.
Because they could. They don't, I mean, they can continue to just do this. There's no economic reason to shut them down, and they have the authority to keep running. Is that correct?
Right. The Fort Calhoun plant is run by a public power district, and the managers in the public power district are very pro-nuclear. So because they don't have a profit motive, and because they are pro-nuclear, they're funneling in tens of millions of dollars a month into a plant that makes no economic sense to run. Fort Calhoun's the smallest plant in the country, under 500 megawatts, and it has a huge staff, more than 500 people. So when you amortize the costs over very little power, the cost per megawatt from Fort Calhoun is astronomical compared to other alternatives. Well, at Kewanee, which is just a couple hundred miles to the north, the management came to exactly the opposite decision. It was a small plant. It had a 20-year license extension, could have run till 2030 or something like that. And management says, we're not making any money. So they pulled the plug on a plant that's operating. Meanwhile, down in Nebraska, they are trying to get a plant operating that's been broken for 2 years because they can soak the ratepayers.
Arnie, I want to go back to Crystal River just for a minute, because you said the Florida ratepayers will never recoup this. And I don't know what laws Florida has in place, but I do know that in California, where San Onofre is, and it's been shut down, the ratepayers are launching a case against Edison because of the financial debacle of the San Onofre units 2 and 3.
Yeah, the San Onofre plants are owned by a company called Southern California Edison, and they were shut down since January of last year, 2012. So now we're into 14 or 15 months of shutdown. Management made some really awful decisions and built steam generators that then failed. So now they're stuck with an $800 million modification to the plant, and they ran for 10 months and it broke. And on top of that, they're winding up paying something like $50 million a month for the 2,000 employees at the San Onofre site, and they're paying for replacement power, and they're paying for all the repair costs. So the repair costs and replacement power for the last year have been $400 million, plus another $500 million to pay for the salaries that are already in the rate base. And there's no end in sight. We still have an $800 million modification that hasn't been paid for too. So the people in California are looking at something between $1 billion and $2 billion at least in costs that Edison is expecting ratepayers to pick up. So the people of California have gone to their Public Utility Commission and said, these costs shouldn't be borne by us. These costs should be borne by the stockholders who own Edison. But because it's a utility, a public utility, Edison says, no, we had a deal, and you guys owe us $2 billion, even though we didn't make prudent decisions, and we created not just an unreliable nuclear plant, but an unsafe nuclear plant. So there'll be a battle royal in the next year between the people of the state of California who don't want to get soaked with $2 billion in costs, and the management and stockholders of Edison, who would very much like to pass the costs on to the stockholders.
So Fairwinds has done 5 technical reports on the problems with the San Onofre steam generators. And those reports clearly show that Edison chose to wiggle out of some regulations and build the steam generators without approval from the NRC. They didn't want a public process, and they wanted to have Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, MHI, design and fabricate these without federal approval. And by skipping that step, they have already spent more than $1 billion on the design and fabrication of steam generators that have broken after only 2 years. The replacement steam generators have been paid for by the ratepayers. And I don't know if the ratepayers' case will be successful or not, but it's a definite reason why Senator Barbara Boxer and Congressman Edward Markey are pushing for public transparency in this process. The NRC needs to be a transparent agency.
So this is a little bit different than the other problems, say, with Fort Calhoun or Crystal River. San Onofre took steps that they shouldn't have. They avoided the process, created the problem, and now they're asking for the ratepayers to deal with the problem.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. You know, in utility law, there's this term called prudence or prudency. Basically, a utility can get paid even if something breaks if they made a dumb mistake, but they can't get paid if they made a malicious error. And the problems at San Onofre fall into the account of being malicious. The Edison management, way back in 2004, made decisions that they were going to deliberately ignore the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that's what happened. Had the NRC been involved in 2004, they would have asked the questions that would have avoided this problem. There was a plant just a couple hundred miles away that Edison is a part owner in at Palo Verde. And they modified their steam generators too. They notified the NRC. The NRC asked the right questions, and it's operating just fine right now. So Edison tried to take a shortcut. They tried to avoid the NRC's...
and the public process. They didn't want public review. The process requires public hearings. And Fairwinds' belief is that Edison did not want to undergo the scrutiny of public hearings and questioning.
But they do want the public to kick in a few bucks.
Oh, yeah, you got it.
So, Arnie, we've talked about a bunch of individual units. What does all of this mean nationally?
You know, Kevin, at the top of the segment, we talked about following the money. And nuclear industry is still money conscious. There's 23 nuclear plants in the country that are identical to Fukushima Daiichi. And frequent watchers of the Fairwind site has known we've talked about those 23 nuclear plants extensively. The containments were too small in 1970. Senior NRC managers didn't want to get them licensed, but they were licensed anyway. And so over time, the entire industry has known that these things were fatally flawed. And of course, Fukushima showed us not once, not twice, but 3 times that these things are fatally flawed. The solution, as the industry sees it, is to drill a hole in the side of the containment so it doesn't contain anymore, and that's called a vent. And then to prevent the radioactivity from getting out, what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would like to see is a filter in that vent. So, you know, sort of like the filter on the end of a cigarette, but obviously much more robust.
And this is to stop the containment from becoming overpressurized.
Yes.
Right.
If there was an accident like at Fukushima, the vent would open. Without the filters, though, all that radioactive gas would just get spewed out like a fire hose out the side of the containment. So what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff has asked for is, okay, you can have your vents to prevent these containment blowing up, but you need to put a filter on it to keep the radioactive gases in. And the utilities that are running these plants are saying, no, we want the vent, but we're not going to spend the $20 million to put a filter on to protect the public. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission staff is demanding filtered vents. The industry doesn't want to spend $20 million on the filters. So what has the industry done is they've gone to Congress. And Congress is inundating the Nuclear Regulatory Commissioners, the 5 commissioners, saying, you're spending public money needlessly. So there's 4,000 engineers on the staff who think that there should be filtered vents, but the 5 commissioners who are going to vote on this are under extraordinary pressure not to have utilities spend the $20 million to fix the problem.
So once again, it's follow the money. And this is industry money trying to get what the industry wants.
How does industry pressure the commissioners?
Directly through Congress. Dozens of congressmen have written to the commission saying, you're wasting my ratepayers' money. Of course, when one of these plants blows up like Fukushima Daiichi, that they might have a different opinion, but right now they're pressuring the commission not to allow these vents to be, these filtered vents to be installed. So there's an ask here. At the end of the broadcast, what we're hoping our listeners will do is contact the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The commissioners' emails are on the website, and write to the 5 commissioners and say, don't cave in to nuclear pressure. Our lives are more important than the $20 million the industry doesn't want to spend. So I hope this week, as people listen to this podcast, they'll do just that. Write to the 5 commissioners and get them to demand safety over profits.
And that does it for this week's show.